Great, welcome for those that are just joining. It is the top of the hour and we've got a packed agenda today. So we will go ahead and get started right away as some folks are trickling in. But thank you so much for joining us. This is MnDOT's pilot webinar on road departure crashes and safety countermeasures. We're looking forward to speaking with you a little bit more about what that all entails today. Before we dive in, let's cover some ground rules and logistics. First things first, this webinar is being recorded. You may see a round red button at the top left of your screen to indicate that recording and transcription services are on. This will be posted in the future on MnDOT's website, so look out for more information on that. But in the meantime, if you would like a PDF copy of the presentation, we do have that online already. So Olivia will be sending that link in the chat where you can access the PDF, as well as the site that has other continuing education resources for you. We will be using some polling activities today, and this one includes Mentimeter. For those that aren't familiar with Mentimeter, we'll want you to have a device, either your phone or your computer, pulled up. We'll send you a code, and then you can do some quick voting exercises just so we can get a sense of where you're at as we talk through some of these topics. For those that are located in Minnesota, only 2 PDHs will be offered. You can log those for continuing education credits, but please note that we will not be sending out individual certificates from this specific webinar. So that is something on your responsibility to fill out. And finally, we will have Q&A at the end because we've got a larger group. We're going to save all of your questions toward the very end of the presentation. So in the meantime, if you have any questions, please utilize the chat. We will be monitoring those and coming back to all of those questions. So let's test out our Mentimeter for those that are not familiar. We'll pull up a QR code here. So if you've got your phone, you can feel free to scan that QR code. Otherwise, on your computer, go to www.menti.com and enter this 8-digit code on the left side of the screen. We will fly through these pretty quickly, so be prepared to keep this open for the entire duration of the webinar today. We'll give it a couple seconds for folks to join, and thanks for those that are sending those thumbs up to indicate that you've joined. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. We've got a couple of you still coming in, and please note you can join at any time with the code that's at the top of the screen. So first things first, we want to know who you're representing today. We've got a lot of county folks, some consultants, some state DOTs. Wonderful. Some of our cities and MPOs, couple from federal and education, but really focusing on those consultants, state DOTs, and counties especially. Awesome. Give it a couple more seconds for final answers to come through. Okay, next question here is, what state do you work in? This is primarily focused on Minnesota. You'll hear from folks around the state of Minnesota today, but we'd love to know if you're joining us from elsewhere in the country. And it looks like we sure are. Lots of Minnesota, some Texas folks, Kentucky, Arizona. Wonderful. Well, we really hope that you can find some valuable information in some of the topics that we talk about today. I think plenty of these countermeasures are going to be applicable no matter where you are. So we'll keep this one up and running. And in the meantime, I'll go ahead and introduce the team that you'll be hearing from today. Next, I'm going to pass this to Gurma, who is our traffic safety engineer with MnDOT's State Aid for Local Transportation. We'll hear from Derek as well, who's our state traffic safety engineer from MnDOT's Office of Traffic Engineering. You'll hear from a couple of consultants. First one is Howard, who is our independent contractor, senior traffic engineer, maybe the most seniored one here, he would say, or he has said in the past. And he worked previously with MnDOT and many others. He's got tons of stories to share with you today about, in some cases, the conception of some of these countermeasures. Olivia is going to be monitoring the chat for us, monitoring our Q&A, and is here to answer any questions. She is our traffic engineer with HDR, the consulting firm helping on this. And then you'll hear from Vic as well, who's one of our local traffic engineers for a county in Minnesota, St. Louis County. You'll get to hear from him on just how some of these countermeasures have been implemented in his community. And finally, I'll be your facilitator. My name is Maddie, and I'm here if you've got any questions. All right, Garma, I will pass it to you next to talk through the background.
Thank you, Maddie, and welcome everyone. My name is Garma Faisa, as Maddie mentioned, and I'm the local roads traffic safety engineer with Minnesota Department of Transportation, State Aid Division, and I've been managing this project in close collaboration with MnDOT Office of Traffic Engineering. Just to give you some background, between 2024 and early 2025, State Aid Office and the Office of Traffic Engineering hosted a series of local road traffic safety workshops across the state. We held around 17 full-day sessions, 4 in Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area and 13 in greater Minnesota, and 3 abbreviated versions of the webinar, the workshops at Minnesota Transportation Conference, towards 0 Days Conference, and County Engineers Association Conference. Altogether, we had around 400 participants, which saw a strong success. A common theme we heard from attendees was the need for more ongoing training opportunities like the workshops. In response, we are piloting this 2-hour webinar to reach a wider audience. The virtual format also makes it easier for more people to attend, not just city or county engineer, but also staff like traffic, cab technicians, or maintenance leads. The hope is that it becomes the first in a regular series of webinars aimed at everyone involved in the design, operation, and maintenance of local roads. There are 2 main reasons why we have prioritized the local road traffic safety workshops and this webinar. The first one is Minnesota is a towards 0 death state. Traffic safety is a top priority, and our goal is 0 deaths and serious injuries on all our roadways. The second reason is, even though state highways often get more attention historically, nearly 70% of fatal and serious injury crashes in Minnesota happen on local roads. To reach our TZD goals, we need safety champions across the entire transportation system. Local agencies play critical roles, and these workshops and webinars are designed to support them with the tools, knowledge, and connections to make a real impact. Next. So, education is vital, but it is one piece of Minnesota's multifaceted strategy to reach 0 deaths. First, Minnesota is finalizing its 2025 through 2029 Strategic Highway Safety Plan, which guides our efforts through the 4 E's: engineering safer roads, enforcing traffic laws, enhancing emergency response, and educating all users. Second, because nearly 70% of serious injury crashes occur on local roads, MnDOT directs about 70% of its federal safety funding to local agencies, aligning resources with where they are most needed. Our workshops and webinars are a key part of this comprehensive approach, empowering local roadway owners with the tools and knowledge to make our roads safer and save lives. Next slide. So, the goals and objectives for today. Today's webinar has several key goals. By the end of this session, you will be able to understand why addressing the road departure crashes is critical for local road safety. A quick note here is that on terminology, while FHWA uses road departure, Minnesota often uses lane departure because road departure is technically a subset of lane departure crashes. You can leave your lane but still stay on roadway. For today, we'll mainly use road departure to align with FHWA, but we'll cover lane departure crashes as well. We'll also explain the AASHTO philosophy for surviving road departure crashes and how it fits within the broader safe system approach. identify at least 3 proven safety strategies to reduce road departure crashes, and debunk common myth related to road departure crashes and safety strategies. Thanks, Maddie. Now I'll take over, please.
Thank you, Germa, and apologies. Okay, we are going to get started here and pass it over to Derek now to talk through just how we mitigate a severe road departure crash. So before we get to that, we've got one more polling question that I'll have you all pull back up. And this is really around the barriers to implementation. So you'll see this popping up. We've got a couple options for you. Feel free to select any that apply, but we want to know, what are those barriers to you that are currently implementing some of those road and lane departure strategies? Looks like funding, public opposition come to the top right away. Some competing priorities, for sure. A couple folks maybe just don't know where to start simply, and others don't have enough information on those most effective strategies. We'll give this another 5 seconds or so. All right, looks like funding and our competing priorities remain at the top. So thank you, everyone. Great. Derek, let's pass it to you next to walk us through the data.
All right, thank you, Maddie. All right, so why do we need to focus on road departure crashes? Based on our new Minnesota Strategic Highway Safety Plan, which this source is draft, we actually now have a final Minnesota Strategic Highway Safety Plan. It was just signed this week, and it was accepted by the Federal Highway Administration. So Minnesota has a brand new Strategic Highway Safety Plan that has been accepted. It was a big lift, so we're there. But as highlighted in the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, 40+% of all of our severe crashes have a lane departure element to them. So it makes up a huge majority of our fatal and serious injury crashes. And this was based on our 2018 to 2022 data. Looking from 2022 to now, not much has changed. Lane departure is still a major issue. As Germa noted, we do have a little bit of a different terminology between lane departure and road departure. Here we might use them a little bit interchangeably, but if we do say road departure, that tends to be vehicles that go off the side of the road, hit things on the side of the road or roll over, where lane departure tends to be vehicles that can also include head-on type crashes. So lane departure is a little bit more encompassing, and that's how we define it in the Strategic Highway Safety Plan as well. We use lane departure as a catch-all, but we also break that down into road departure and also into head-on type crashes as well. But we'll be talking a little bit about both today. So next slide. What's interesting when we look at the road departure crashes, though, or these lane departure type crashes, is actually, though, when we break it down a little bit further, and if we remove the serious injury crashes and focus only on fatalities, lane departure crashes are actually the leading cause of fatalities in the state of Minnesota. To address this and work towards our goal of 0 deaths, we really do need to focus our efforts on road departure strategies like those we're going to discuss today. From 2017 to 2019, Minnesota saw these types of crashes at near record lows. Those are some of the lowest crash numbers we've had in the state. However, with the advent of COVID, we saw a huge shift in driver behavior out on our roadway networks, notably speeding and unbelted drivers. Those two surged during the pandemic, and closely linked to those types of crashes is lane departure type crashes. So we saw these lane departure type crashes actually surge as well during COVID. Despite our best efforts for the last decade plus to mitigate these types of crashes, this is still a huge issue and something that we are still working diligently on, and we need all of our partners out there as well to help us with this issue. Next slide. So one thing that we've often heard when we've been doing safety plans and meeting with locals is, especially these local jurisdictions that are smaller, is we don't have a lane departure crash issue on our roadway system. It's understandable. A lot of these smaller jurisdictions with less crashes than you think, based on the crash data, the numbers just don't seem to be there. And if you look at this as an example, this is Chippewa County, which is located in western Minnesota, part of our District 8 Area Transportation Partnership. If you look at just Chippewa County, in the 5 years of crash data here that we have, 2018 to 2022, there's only 19 road departure crashes, and only 2 of those were severe. If you're Chippewa County, it might be very easy to say, we don't have a crash problem. We don't have a lane departure issue. But the problem really isn't just one county when we look at this from kind of a perspective of starting to look upwards. When we look at that next tier up, when we look at that area transportation partnership, this western part of coalition of counties that we call ATP 8 or Minnesota District 8, when we look at those 8, when we look at that set of counties as a whole, now we have 567 road departure crashes, and 61 of those are severe type crashes, severe road departure type crashes. And now you start to see an issue. And now when we start to look at this as a statewide level, if we look at just our rural county roads and looking just at lane departure severe crashes on a statewide basis, now we're at nearly 800 severe crashes statewide. So looking from a state, looking downwards, we see a huge problem. Nearly 800 severe fatal and serious injury crashes statewide in a 5-year period. But when you start to break this down to the ATP, down to the county, down to individual segments of roadways, it's very easy to say, I don't have a problem. But really the risk is there, and the risks do need to be mitigated, because as we start to move up, we get more and more crashes, and it becomes a bigger and bigger problem that we see statewide. Next slide. So in order to address these bigger numbers, we're going to kind of talk about kind of an overall high level, what's kind of our tiered philosophy for addressing roadway departure crashes. The first goal really is kind of simple. It's keep vehicles in their lane and on the roadway. You tend not to get in much trouble if you're staying in your lane and you're staying on the roadway. So if you don't depart the roadway, we don't have a road departure crash. So step one, let's keep people in their lane. Next is if vehicles do depart the road, the next step is let's make sure that the roadside is recoverable, that slope they can go down safely, and it gives the drivers the best chance at safety returning to their lane, or at the very least, prevent a rollover type crash. So that's often a very common crash type we see is they depart the road, they go down this embankment and they roll, and that's where a lot of severe injuries occurs during that rolling process. So we want to prevent that as well. The next kind of major crash we see is if you've left your lane, you've gone down the embankment, you're still up, is people tend to hit things, and things like trees, power poles, all sorts of things, embankments, driveway entrances. There's a whole host of things for vehicles to stay. So what we want to do next is enhance and maintain this concept of the clear zone. Clear zones need to be enhanced and maintained so that when vehicles do depart the roadway, the risk of hitting these fixed object is reduced, and even better if it's eliminated. So that's kind of the overall philosophy. If you can't make the roadside slope recoverable and you can't you can't maintain your clear zone, the next step is kind of that installing barriers. So things like plate beam guardrail can be really helpful as well. That's kind of the next step beyond this, but we're going to really focus on this part right now today, these first 3 steps. So the 3 tiers of this philosophy work to prevent road departure crashes from occurring and reduce the severity of crashes when they do occur. Next slide. In Minnesota, we have embraced this philosophy in how we prioritize our improvements on state roads, and those improvements we support with local road funding. Rather than prioritizing wide shoulder paving, we are really focused on lower cost features that keep vehicles on the road. Lots of these, however, we'll be getting to later in the webinar today. So things like rumble strips, enhanced pavement markings, chevrons, and so on. We do support limited narrow shoulder paving. But the reason we really support this idea of this narrow shoulder paving is really this idea that we can get the rumble strip on there. And the rumble strip is one of the most effective tools. Howard will talk more about that in a little bit. We also prioritize features that make road departure events recoverable. Strategies like side slope improvements can be done, and also clear zone enhancements. Clear zone enhancements are usually one of the better tools that we can use as well. And again, if you can't make the roadside slope recoverable, if you can't maintain that clear zone, we should be looking at things like shielding and installing barriers on the side of the roadway. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Olivia. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone. We wanted to take a quick moment to connect this to the safe system approach. That is the approach that MnDOT and Federal Highway have adopted as we work towards goals of zero death. So really quickly, for those who are not familiar with the safe system approach, really there's 2 key points that the SSA is acknowledging that's new. The first is that people are going to make mistakes, and the second is that humans have limitations and are fragile. So roads in a safe system are really designed to accommodate those known human limitations and expected behaviors. People are still held accountable for poor decision making and behaviors, but there's going to be normal human lapses in judgment or diligence, and we expect those things to happen, so we want to configure our roads so that those errors don't lead to death. And even with the forgiving design, crashes are still going to occur in a safe system. So we want to design roadways that limit the crash forces that are transferred to the human body. So the SSA is a principles-based approach. The 6 principles are seen on the outside of the wheel. Death and serious injury are unacceptable. Humans make mistakes. Humans are vulnerable. Responsibility is shared. Safety is proactive, and redundancy is crucial. And then you'll see those 5 wedges within the wheel. Those are the 5 elements of the SSA, which are really the conduits through how we actually implement the safe system approach. Those are safe road users, safe vehicles, safe speeds, safe roads, and post-crash care. Next slide. So as we think about that 3-tiered approach that Derek just introduced, and those 2 core pieces of the safe system approach that we want to accommodate human mistakes and vulnerabilities, they translate really clearly together. So we're recognizing that humans are going to make errors as we work to keep vehicles on the road and make that roadside slope recoverable. People might get distracted or tired, causing them to start to drift out of their lane, and that's where we use countermeasures like rumble strips to alert drivers they're departing from their lane, and recoverable side slopes to give them a chance to redirect their course without rolling. And then we also want to keep those impacts and the kinetic energy at a tolerable level for the human body so it's survivable. And as we're recognizing those vulnerabilities, and that's where, again, we're wanting those recoverable side slopes, preventing rollover crashes, and we want to maintain the clear zone to prevent those fixed object crashes. Next slide. So taking a little bit of a step back over the years, MnDOT's received numerous letters from the public, which when they've shared that various features have saved their lives. And it's really easy to get caught up in the data and the numbers or expected crash reduction of these strategies we're going to talk about today. But we can't forget that behind each one of these numbers is a person with friends and family who are all impacted by this. So hearing firsthand from the public on how these features have truly impacted them and saved their lives, it goes a long way. And so today we're going to share a couple testimonials throughout the day just to pause and remember that that these are people we're talking about. So this first one comes from Corinne in 2016, and I'm just going to read a brief blurb from it. She says, "Dear DOT, I want to offer a sincere thank you for the rumble strips that you placed on the edges of the roads and down the center. Because of the loss of vision and the winds with this poor weather that she was experiencing, I would not have had a sense of where I was on the road. The rumble strips were critical to my being able to ensure that I was in my lane, even if I could not see ahead. Given the complex weather that we have in the state, this seems like an extremely valuable and justifiable tool and expense to ensure safe driving." Next slide. Germa mentioned we're going to debunk a couple myths today as well. This first one that we want to talk about is wider shoulders. Often we hear wider shoulders are one of the best strategies to address roadway departure crashes. Next slide to reveal. False. It's a common misconception that wider shoulders are one of the first strategies we should turn to when it comes to addressing roadway departure crashes. While wider shoulders can be an effective safety strategy, they often result in higher speeds. When the road's wider, it feels more comfortable to drive faster. And as we think about speeds, we know that higher speeds directly tie to higher severity crashes, which really ties to what I just talked about with the safe system approach and the safe speeds element and human vulnerabilities. If we take ourselves way back to when we had our first physics class, we can recall that formula for kinetic energy: 1/2 times mass times the velocity squared. And that formula alone does a really good job of demonstrating how much of an impact that speed has on the overall kinetic energy. If we break that down into layman's terms, we have this small change in travel speed that can result in a relatively large change in the distance to stop your vehicle. And that has a much larger change on the impact energy, which is that kinetic energy equation we're talking about. That has an even larger impact on the energy that's transferred to the human body. And from what we just talked about with the safe system approach, we recognize that this impact energy has a really large impact in the probability of death or serious injury. If we go to the next slide. Another way to look at this is to just look at some of the expected crash reduction factors and planning level cost estimates for some of these strategies. Howard's going to get into a lot more details on these, but just quickly comparing the crash reduction factor of paving deteriorated shoulders compared to rumble strips, enhanced edge lines, chevrons, we see that the paving of shoulders is much less effective at reducing crashes. In addition to that, we also see that it's a lot more expensive. So that's why we're focused on strategies like rumble strips, enhanced edge lines, chevrons, these lower cost, higher effective strategies. Another note is that MnDOT's really found that often the reduction of crashes where wider shoulders are installed is actually a result of other elements that are installed along with those wider shoulders, things like rumble strips, improved side slopes, access management, those kind of things. So we wanted to address that up front, why we're not going to talk about wider shoulders and why we're focused on these other strategies today. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Maddie, Howard, and Vic for really the bulk of today's presentation.
Howard, off
folks,
to you.
Good morning. Yeah, good morning, folks. Thanks again for joining us today. For the next 90 minutes or so, Vic Lund and I will be sharing information about Minnesota's approach to addressing road departure crashes. I'll spend most of my time providing an overview and then talk about effectiveness. And Vic will be sharing with you his observations and experiences in St. Louis County. Next, please. Oh, right here. All right. We follow the basic approaches identified in AASHTO's Strategic Highway Safety Plan, and Germa's mentioned it, Derek's mentioned it, but the notion is the best thing to do is keep vehicles on the road. If they don't leave the road, then what's outside your shoulder PIs and down in the ditches is really not of any consequence. So the things we're going to focus on are the kinds of things that have been proven effective at helping keep vehicles on the road, making the road edge more clearly defined so people know where it's at. So things like rumble strips, and we'll also talk about something called mumble strips. I'll explain what those are later. Enhanced ground and wet reflective pavement markings, chevrons, and then a treatment to enhance the friction in curves when the pavement is wet. Before we get started though, Maddie has a question about the polling question for you.
Yes, thank you, Howard. So for each of these countermeasures, we are going to have 2 questions for you to answer. So again, please keep that Mentimeter pulled up. The first question we'll ask you at the beginning of these every time is just how would you rate your level of knowledge? And specifically this time on rumble and mumble strips on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not familiar, 5 being very familiar. We'll give this a few more seconds for folks to respond, but it looks like on average, folks are pretty familiar with rumble and mumble strips. And we'll head to the second question, which is a short answer question here. But what are the barriers that prevent you from implementing rumble and mumble strips right now? And again, think through these. This is our first one, but these 2 questions will reappear, excuse me. Okay, we've got noise level, a lot of noise complaints. Public with the noise, absolutely. People, money, cost, narrow pavements. No paved shoulders, again, the community, funding, road width, county or city standards, and again, some of that public pushback. So we'll keep moving through our presentation, but appreciate your insights, everyone. Howard, back to you.
Maddie, thank you. We're going to talk about rumble strips, but I wanted to provide a little background before we start. As Derek mentioned, we choose to focus on road departure because road departure crashes account for 50% of our fatalities and 40% of our severe injuries. And if you recall, he showed you an inverted pyramid chart. The number across our entire county system is very large, something on the order of 150 of these severe road departure crashes a year. But that's over a 40,000 mile system. The density, severe road departure crashes per mile, 0.01 per year. That means any given mile is likely to see a severe road departure crash once in 100 years. Another statistic that we found is that 90% of the locations that had a severe road departure crash in any given year hadn't had another one in the 5 prior years. So the low density of these crashes was a real challenge. How do you develop a strategy to prioritize the system and in order to identify the segments that are most at risk and then worthy of implementation of a project? I mentioned that our system, county system, is 40,000 miles of paved roads, and I said paved roads on purpose, that we did an analysis and found that paved roads on our system are most at risk. That about 75% of our county system is paved. 90% of severe road departure crashes occurred on the 75% that's paved. I also had the opportunity to look at this same phenomenon across North Dakota, South Dakota, and Iowa, and the numbers vary from state to state. But the conclusion is the same, that the severe road departure crashes were overrepresented on the paved portions of the county system in each of those states. A majority of severe crashes occurred on the minority of the road miles on the system. We concluded that a strategy for selecting rural segments for safety improvements could not be based solely on the presence of a crash. That just didn't make any sense to us. Instead, we developed a strategy based on the notion that severe road departure crashes are widely distributed, but not randomly distributed, and that all segments are not equally at risk. We looked at over 500 locations of where these crashes had occurred, and we found that there was a handful of roadway and traffic characteristics that were predictive. The presence of these characteristics increased the probability of a crash. So the characteristics included curb densities. Segments of road that were curvilinear were more at risk than segments of road that were simply on a tangent. Access density, and we'll bring up a chart later that shows you, but densities greater than 8 accesses per mile made the segment more at risk. And then we also did a rating of the road edge. Segments with 3 or more of these risk factors represented a minority of the system, about 30%, but a majority of severe road departure crashes. And then the priority segments had crash densities that were 40% higher than the average. A strategy for selecting a set of safety strategies was based on the notion that the solution to a low density of crashes is to widely deploy strategies over as many miles as possible. And the only way to do that was to provide strategies, focus on strategies that are low cost. That led us then to the use of rumbles and the use of enhanced deadlines. To date, rumble strips have been deployed along about 3,000 miles of our paved county system and over 8,500 miles along the state system. Next slide, please, Penny. Following the installation of these rumbles, MnDOT has found that, again, crash reductions, you can read them, but substantial crash reductions in lowering the number incidents of fatal and injury crashes, run off the road crashes. I'll mention, you can see in the photos here that our original rumble strip design was a rectangular cut that started at the road surface. And I'll come back to that again here in just a minute. Next slide, please, Maddie. This photo shows what we call a rumble stripe, where the edge line is placed over the groove. Now, we encourage counties to consider this if they were considering to do an edge rumble. Installing the pavement marking over the groove has two particular benefits, primarily at night and in wet weather, that there'll always be some of the marking that is above the water level then. And so rumble stripes, we have a photo coming up later that will show you this, but using this technique improves wet weather nighttime visibility. And we also have found that using this technique and putting some of the pavement marking material down in a groove prolongs the pavement life. It makes some of the pavement marking inaccessible to snow plows, and we're going to talk about that several times. Next slide, please. All right, so I mentioned the notion of mumble strips or sinusoidal, and you can see what they look like. Just a little bit of background. The first wave of installation of rumble strips that was done by the counties, a good thing happened. Obviously, the number of crashes went down. But when you're first, there's things that you just don't anticipate. And one of the things that was not anticipated was the level of complaints from adjacent homeowners about the noise. The increase in noise level was real, something on the order of 15 decibels, and attempts to justify the use of the rumbles on the greater good associated with crash reduction didn't make a lot of sense to a lot of homeowners who would say there's never been a crash in front of my home. And again, given the density of 1 every 100 years of these severe crashes, it's entirely likely that the homeowner was absolutely telling the truth. There had never been a crash in front of their home. Why are we doing this? In our selection process that we had suggested to the counties even accounted for the presence of homes. We only made the recommendation where the density of homes was very low, less than 1 per every quarter mile. But complaints were still common. So because the problem, the road departure crashes was large, rumble strips had proven to be very effective, but very noisy. The research then was done that focused in on this notion of cutting grooves in this sinusoidal pattern with all of the groove below the road surface. And that proved to reduce the noise levels. The next slide, please, Manny. The sinusoidal rumbles, again, reduced the exterior noise levels, but were able to maintain interior noise levels and vibrations. And what MnDOT found was there was no difference in the performance between the traditional vertical cuts, rectangular cuts, and then the sinusoidal cuts. So the sinusoidal use of sinusoidal mumble strips is proven to be a very good thing here. We've asked in each of the meetings that we had last summer, had people heard any public complaints after they used the sinusoidal rumble? And the answer was uniformly no. There had been no complaints from adjacent homeowners. Next slide, please, Manny. This is the proof, if you will. Over on the far right-hand side of this graph, you can see that the increase in the number of, in the decibels and the noise levels associated with the rumbles was substantially reduced. And this explains why there have been no complaints. So most agencies that use rumbles are in fact converting over to the mumble strips. There's no price differential. The effectiveness is still there, and the complaints basically go away. So it's a better than all the way around. Let's see. Oh, I think Vic, you're going to take over now and
Yep.
talk about your experience in St. Louis County.
All right. Thanks, Howard. And good morning, and possibly good afternoon, just depending on where you are. And also welcome to those who are out of state visiting us today. So appreciate that. So this question of do only state DOTs or does only MnDOT utilize rumble strips or sinusoidal rumble strips? And the answer is no. If we look at this next slide, at least 7 counties that we're aware of here in the state of Minnesota have implemented a sinusoidal rumble strip on their county roads. In terms of cost, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, it's actually very comparable, if not identical, between the two different types of the traditional rectangular style rumble strip and a sinusoidal style. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just a difference in the cutting head that is placed on the machine, the grooving machine. And there might be some differences in terms of like stop and start points and those sorts of things, but those are very, very insignificant. And like Howard said, there was a Minnesota effort about, I think it was at least 7 years ago, to design our version of sinusoidal rumble strip. We looked across the country at different styles. California was one of them. And we basically came up with something that was similar to other states, but there was a definite Minnesota variation to it. So what we've been using that since then, and that information is available on the Minnesota DOT website if you are interested. Next slide. So one of the things that we've heard from it as an side incidental idea is this benefit for snowplow drivers. And we here in St. Louis County, we're in northeastern Minnesota. Sometimes we'll get the lake effect off Lake Superior, or just sometimes it'll be kind of blizzard conditions, but typical Midwest winter conditions, right? But one of the things that we've heard from snowplow operators is this appreciation for having rumble strips either at the center line and or at the shoulder, because it helps them in those very limited visibility conditions to know where they are on the roadway. For example, I mean, I didn't grow up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, but I lived there for some time while I was going to school. And I've been through many interesting winter weather events where you're driving 5 miles per hour and that seems too fast. But it's times like that where it's very appreciated. Obviously, those are not as, that's not necessarily the focus of rumble strips. Most of the target crashes we're looking for, most of those crashes occur during the daytime, during good weather conditions, good visibility, those sorts of things. So in the St. Louis County Road Safety Plan, we've been implementing 3 types of rumble strips here in our county, and a lot of counties in the state have been doing the same. Centerline, shoulder rumble strips, and then the shoulder rumble stripes. And like Howard mentioned, there's that nighttime wet condition retroreflectivity visibility benefit, because the back side of that groove is not submerged in water, because the water is draining out of that groove. It never can actually get to that point because of the cross section of the roadway. And so from your human eye perspective, you see, it would actually be a bunch of dots, but your brain kind of puts it in together into one line. So you see this continuous reflectivity of that edge line marking during those conditions. And the first time I did it, I know I might be a strange person, but I was super excited because it was stunning. The first time this is almost 15 plus years ago, but to see the difference that just simply having a non-wet reflective marking inside of a rumble strip can do. All right, next slide. So one of the things that we did for our centerline rumble strip project where we deployed using a sinusoidal design is we looked at this question of prioritization and which roads ought to be treated. And so what we did here is a similar approach to what the County Road Safety Plan took, in that we binned our segments by ADT, and we also binned our segments by number of serious cross centerline or head-on crashes, okay? And what we found is that 43% of our system is over 1,000 vehicles a day. Excuse me, I said that backwards. The over 1,000 vehicles per day, it's 10% of our mileage. There we go. 10% of our mileage is over 1,000 vehicles per day. So it's a very small percentage of our mileage. However, almost 50%, climbing up towards 50% of our serious head-on crashes are occurring on just 10% of our road mileage. That was good enough for us to say we're just going to prioritize roadway segments that have an ADT greater than 1,000 vehicles per day. We didn't look at any other risk factor. We just simply said those are our priority, and that's where we're treating our segments. Next slide. So this centerline rumble strip project that we completed, it was in 2018. It was our first project, and coincidentally, it was actually been our only centerline project. And the reason for that is this concern about joint deterioration. I do want to recognize that. And there is debate in the industry of, do rumble strips in a joint accelerate the deterioration? And there was actually a Michigan State study. Look it up. The title is Evaluation of Centerline Rumble Strip Impacts on Short-Term Pavement Performance. It was performed by Michigan State University. It was focused in the state of Michigan. And that research suggested that there was not an acceleration of joint deterioration. I mean, joints are going to always deteriorate, right? So it's not a question of deterioration, it's a question of the rate of deterioration. And they were suggesting that it may not necessarily be as cut and dried as some might suggest. So something to think about. Our cost per mile for our rumble strip project was about $5,000 per mile. That included the pavement markings, and we did a fog seal treatment just to for sealing up that centerline joint. Next slide. All right, some pictures that we took when this process was ongoing. See, it's a pretty simple process, and that's why the cost is so low. We have the milling machine in the upper right corner. On the far right of that image, you can see kind of the haze that's developed when the cutter head is grooving into the pavement. And then right behind it is a truck and sweeper combination where they're picking up all the debris that was grooved out of that marking. One of the, I'll save this for the next slide, I suppose. Let's go to the next slide. All right, one of my favorite slides. I've used this many times in many of my presentations. This is not a formal MUTCD sign, but man, it ought to be. Rumble strips ahead, watch out. The rumble strips ahead actually was original to the picture. This was requested by a county representative, I'll just put it that way. We implemented some rumble stripes. You can see the rumble stripes in that picture on the left-hand side of that sign. I added the watch out just to be cute, I suppose, but we did actually deploy that out there just in terms of a public engagement strategy. But if you go to the next slide, that project was in 2010, and some of these projects get burned in your mind, and it's interesting how you remember these things. But in the month of August in 2010, this is like 3 years after I started. I've been practicing for about 18 years now. But as a younger engineer, having 60 phone calls in 1 month, all directed at you with newspaper articles and an ad in the upper left corner, you can see rumble strips, rumble strips, rumble strips with my name and contact information. That really accelerated the phone calls. And it was an interesting experience. I'm glad actually it happened because I learned a lot. Some of the things I learned here on the next slide. First is, and it's not necessarily listed here, but always keeping your attention on what you're doing. The focus is safety, right? So that was one of the common themes that I had through all the phone calls that I had, was it's about safety, it's about safety. And I'll explain to testimonial about that in a second. Make sure that this is not news to your elected officials. This is one of the key strategies. You can use these for a lot of the strategies we're talking about today. Make sure that everything you're doing is not news. The second thing is think about, in terms of placement, focus on rural areas with lower residential density. This, what I call inequitable distribution of benefits, is the person who lives along the edge of the roadway is probably not going to realize the benefits of that rumble strip personally, but it's going to be somebody that doesn't live there that's going to realize the benefits of that. And the old carpenter's adage, measure twice, cut once. Just make sure that when you're putting it down, it's very difficult to fill rumble strips or remove them. So just make sure that you're confident in the deployment of those rumble strips. So with that, I think we're moving on to a poll question. Actually, the testimony. Okay, so this is a testimony from MnDOT. This person said, quote, "I drifted off to the right and heard the warning rumble strips and woke up. I don't know if I would have woke up on my own or not, but I know it only takes a split second for an accident to happen. Thank God they were decided to install those rumble strips at that location." The other testimony I'll just mention real quick, this is me in that rumble stripe project I mentioned in 2010, had this phone call from an older gentleman. It was a shorter conversation, I recall, and he wasn't happy, and I was explaining things that was frustrating to him, I suppose, but we hung up after a short conversation, and then less than 5 minutes later, he calls me back, and he said, Vic, I have to apologize in my behavior. I just realized I thought about something. My grandson is getting his driver's license, and I just realized these things could actually save his life. And so I learned something from him. He personalized the issue. He didn't just think about the statistics that I was bantering about as a young geeky engineer, I suppose. But now I think we have the whole question.
We sure do. Thanks, Vic, for that. And we will be kind of transitioning over here to another topic away from our rumbles and mumbles and onto enhanced ground and wet reflective pavement markings. So again, the same two questions apply. We'd like to know where your level of knowledge lies on ground and wet reflective pavement markings. And it looks like folks are, again, pretty similar to the last question, fairly familiar with this. Give it a couple more seconds as this is evening out. Maybe less familiar than our mumble and rumble strips. And moving on to those barriers. What are those barriers that are preventing you from implementing these, if you're familiar with what these are? Cost. That'll be a recurring theme, I imagine. Our cost, maintenance of those, government. Again, the cost to install seems to be a really big one. And then here, this resistance to change. We'll let these keep floating in as we pass this back to Howard to kick us back off with enhanced pavement markings.
Eddie, thank you. When we started making suggestions to the counties about dealing with the road edge, we acknowledged that you couldn't put rumbles everywhere. That just didn't make sense. There are some very low volume roads along the county system, and it wouldn't really make that much sense to be investing thousands of dollars a mile on those extraordinarily low volume roads. So we thought about and made suggestions about using enhanced pavement markings. It's been the practice here in Minnesota for at least 50 years that all of the paved roads, state highways, county roads, have markings. So a typical 4-inch edge line, but that was clearly not sufficient in order to address the road departure kind of crashes. And so we looked at a variety of enhanced pavement markings and suggested using a wider marking. The next slide, please, Maddie. And so what we did is looked at things like 6-inch, 8-inch edge lines as an alternative strategy on roads where the rumbles didn't seem to make any sense, or the density of residential development was so high that we knew noise complaints would overwhelm any public support for the rumbles. And so MnDOT and the counties over the past 10 years have installed something on the order of 40,000 miles of enhanced edge lines using, again, either 6 or 8-inch edge lines, and a crash reduction of approaching 20%. And so again, the notion is with the wider edge lines, we're painting, all the agencies are painting some edge line anyway for an additional cents per foot. You can get a 6 or 8-inch edge line, and the reaction of the public has been very positive. Next slide, please, Maddie. All right, so we talked about, again, this notion of ground and wet reflective. When we began this process of addressing road departure crashes 15 or so years ago, the highest priority was focused on what can we do to make the road edge more visible to the public. We were aware of the noise issue, and at the time, sinusoidal rumbles had not yet been invented. And so we focused on a strategy that would enhance the visibility, particularly nighttime wet weather, and not cause any noise complaints. And I think I had mentioned that one of the first counties who deployed edge rumbles, again, being first out, there's things you don't anticipate. He picked a road, the county engineer, where he clearly had road departure crashes, but he also clearly had a high density of residential development. And, the worst possible thing happened. He paid to put the rumbles in, and about 2 months later, he had to pay to cover them up. And when it came time for us to suggest a strategy for this road as part of their county road safety plan, when we got to this particular segment of road, the county engineer reminded me of the challenge he had faced previously. And I said I was aware of that, and no, I wasn't going to be suggesting rumbles again. There was this strategy called ground in wet reflective pavement markings. And so the idea is in Minnesota and many other northern states, we have this problem of maintaining pavement markings with most of the damage being done by snow plows. So in order to minimize this damage, we use very small glass beads in our paint, so that as the plows work on this outer layer of paint, there's always some of these glass beads that are left and support nighttime retroreflectivity of the lines. However, with these small beads, there's a real problem. They're so small that when a thin film of water associated with, when it rains, the water on the pavement, the thin film of water is thicker than what the diameter of the beads are. As this photo on the right shows, there's a center line there that you can't see because it's not wet reflective, and the wet reflective line on the right just stands out at night, and it really does enhance the nighttime wet weather visibility, and is really a very good strategy. This technique then of ground in, what we're saying is we actually grind a shallow trench for this edge line, put the pavement marking with larger glass beads down in this trench. The larger glass beads gets them above the thin film of water. Being in the trench protects them from the snow plows. And this has been a very highly effective strategy for us, and has enhanced the durability and the lifespan of these pavement markings. And Vic's going to talk more about that. Follow-on research that, next slide, please, Maddie. It is very supportive. Again, the notion that 25% reduction in these run off the road crashes during wet conditions is a very positive kind of strategy, and that linked with the idea that the durability of the pavement marking, the lifespan of it is enhanced. I think now is even more important because Federal Highway has just initiated a requirement like they did a dozen years ago of minimum levels of retroreflectivity must be maintained for pavement markings now, just like they had done with sign sheeting material a number of years ago. Vic, you're up. Please share some of your experience in St. Louis County.
All right, thanks, Howard. One thing I want to mention too, as we get into the discussion a little bit further, and it's emphasizing something Howard said earlier about this whole issue of crash density, in explaining the need for proactive strategies over a wide portion of your system. And the number I have here that I've shared before in other presentations is looking at just the county road system in Minnesota. There's about 44,000 miles of county roads in the state of Minnesota. And the fatal crash density, just fatal crashes of that mileage is 0.003 fatal crashes per mile per year. So I explained it this way, that if you took all 44,000 miles of county roads in the state, diced them up into 1 mile segments, threw them into a large paper bag, and randomly withdrew one county road mile segment, you're going to wait on average over 300 years for the next fatal crash to occur in that random segment, right? So it emphasizes the fact that we can't, when we talk about roadway departure strategies, you can't be using crash data as your primary basis of decision making to prioritize locations. Rather, it has to be based on risk factors And also just thinking about a systematic wide perspective, right? So systemic meaning, treating locations that are at risk, and systematic meaning treating an entire system, whether it be a certain jurisdiction or a certain road type or whatever. So similar systematic aspect here in St. Louis County, you can see based on our different types of highways that we own and maintain. In Minnesota, we have county state aid highways, we have county roads. So the county roads are not do not receive state funding, state gas tax funding. And then some counties have unorganized townships where there's no township government, and so we have some roads there too. But what we've done is this prioritization of recognizing that most of our traffic and most of our risk is on our county state aid highways, and so we're deploying as a standard across all those roads 6-inch wide edge line. Whether it's surface applied paint, ground and wet reflective, whatever the case is, but it's a 6-inch wide edge line plus a center line. And our county road system is recognizing that we're, fewer vehicles, little less risk, less mileage, and using a 4-inch wide edge line on those. And then for our even further down the line, our unorganized township roadways that are paved, looking at a centerline marking only on those systems. And the reason we do this is because we have limited funds. I mean, we just can't afford to pay for 6-inch markings on everything. So it's a question of prioritization, moving it towards sections of your system that is at risk. Next slide. So the County Road Safety Plan recognizes and promotes at least 2 different types of pavement marking strategies. The first is a 6-inch paint surface applied. That would be for your typical lower volume roadways, but they're at risk, identified at risk by the County Road Safety Plan, but there's very few vehicles out there. And again, recognizing that we can't place grooved in wet reflective markings everywhere. And then that's typically a 1 to 2 year service life on those. And we are replacing those about every 2 years for those sections. And then the second is the 6-inch grooved in wet reflective epoxy or multi-component type pavement marking. We're getting 4 to 7 years out of those, and that experience is here in St. Louis County with the plow frequency that we experience up here. And we're utilizing a large part, our Highway Safety Improvement Program funding that is just distributed to the state of Minnesota. That's then distributed by MnDOT to the local governments that we have an opportunity for that. It's federal funds, which means there's an extra process that goes along with that, but besides the safety benefit, thinking about just simply having an additional funding source to supplement your pavement marking budgets. I mean, think about the St. Louis County, we're a unique creature. We have 3,000 miles of roadway. Half of that is paved. 1,500 miles were spent. We invest approximately about $3 million a year in pavement markings. That's a sizable percentage, and the ratios work out that way, based on your system, but it's a sizable portion of your budget. Next slide. So this question that we had to struggle with early on, thinking about maintaining pavement markings, is challenging surfaces of chip seals and scrub seals. We're doing a lot of that here in St. Louis County, and a lot of other agencies across the state and country are doing this. This benefit of preserving the pavement by applying a chip seal or scrub seal early on in the pavement life. And what we did is we realized that we can groove in those markings the year after. And so how it works here in St. Louis County is we'll pave a road in year 0. In year 1, we'll chip seal it with a surface applied epoxy. So year 0, surface applied epoxy. Year 1, surface applied epoxy. In year 2, we'll come in and do a grooving project, we call it. And so we'll groove in the wet reflective epoxy edgeline and centerline markings on those roads. And that chip seal can support having that grooving activity within a year. It's cured enough where it's hard enough that you're not gumming up the groover head. Next slide. And so one thought on your wet reflective specification. So if you're deploying wet reflective markings, it's different than wet reflective, non-wet reflective. Think about this understanding of wet continuous versus a wet recovery specification. There are some vendors or material suppliers, I should say, that provide a wet recovery product, and then there's some that provide a wet continuous product. And so wet recovery basically says after it rains, it stopped raining. The pavement's still wet, but it's just, there isn't like a thick film of water on the pavement surface, right? Whereas a wet continuous is a condition where it's raining, you have a relative thick film of water on the pavement surface, and you can still see the marking through that active rain event. And so we've been using a wet continuous specification on all of our wet reflective markings. It provides that better benefit, excuse me, during that nighttime rain event where a traditional non-reflective marking, your road turns black in those conditions. I have a couple resources here that I have on the slide. If you can't see those, you can download the presentation afterwards, but there's a couple articles. One is through Roads and Bridges that I was a part of that article a few years ago, talking about setting a specification, and then MnDOT has some research about establishing a wet specification that you could consider. Next slide. Cost experience between the two typical markings that we're using. So 6-inch paint surface applied, of course, that's going to be your cheapest, about $1,000 to $1,500 per mile. This is based on 2025 cost data here in St. Louis County. And then for your grooved in marking, 6-inch edge line, of course, these are both sides of the road. It's about $8,500 to $10,000 per mile. So that's why you saw me earlier explain, recognizing it, and either it's at risk or it's a higher form of function roadway, is we're replacing those 6-inch wet reflective markings. The last thing I'll mention on this, I'll hand it back to Howard, is you'll notice that a lot of the costs that we're dealing with here, or sharing, are in the thousands of dollars per mile, not in the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars per mile. And it just recognizes that, there isn't enough safety funding or just funding in general to support reconstruction, those sorts of activities where we can clear up or improve the roadside, add a road shoulder, those types of things. Although those are great things to do and take advantage of those when you have the opportunity. But in many cases, you're just never going to have that opportunity. And this is where we've shifted towards looking at these proactive, lower cost strategies that we can deploy widely over a significant portion of the system at thousands of dollars per mile. All right, next slide. I think this is a polling question.
Yes, thank you, Vic. We will head back to our polling and transition on to the next countermeasure, which is our chevrons. So please go ahead and rate your level of knowledge on chevrons. While we're doing that, I'll give a quick reminder that we will be taking questions through our chat. I think I saw a couple hands being raised. Unfortunately, today we won't have time for those questions, but we will answer our questions at the very end during our Q&A time. And it looks like folks are fairly familiar with their knowledge on chevrons. So we'll move forward again to that second question. What are the barriers that prevent you from implementing chevrons currently? Okay, some costs, some data. In some cases, maybe there aren't any barriers. Maintenance challenges, no barriers. We like to see that. Lack of a cohesive program. Some data. Okay. Great. We'll appreciate these responses. We'll keep moving forward and have Howard talk to us a little bit more about chevrons.
And Howard, I just sorry to interject. I just want to give a quick time update. We're about 10 to 15 minutes behind, and I want to make sure we can save some time for questions. So if we could get through next strategies a little bit more efficiently to save time, that would be great.
Well, that one of my friends says that whenever I'm speaking, always bet the over. So I'll work on this.
No, it's all great information. We appreciate it.
Matt, you made the comment that folks seem to have an understanding of chevrons. I got a piece of trivia coming up, folks, that I'm betting you don't know, but we'll get to that here in just a minute. A little background about curves. Why were curves a priority here in Minnesota? Our initial analysis of the county system, again, around 40,000 miles of county roads, found that 50% of road departure crashes occurred in curves, and curves make up about 20% of the system. So think of that again. 50% of the crashes occur in curves. We concluded you couldn't address road departure without including the 50% that occurs in the curves. So a minority of the system experienced a majority of the crashes, and that made curves an obvious target. We also determined that there are around 19,000 curves on the county system, but 98% of the curves had no severe road departure crashes in a given 5-year period. Think of that again. 50% of all the crashes occurred in curves, but 98% of the curves had no crashes. A little under 2% had one crash, and not a single curve experienced one severe road departure crash per year. I concluded we just don't have a dead man's curve here in Minnesota. And I also have looked at curve-related crashes in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Iowa, and the same conclusion applies. There were no dead man's curves in either of those states. At this point, I will acknowledge that all of us here in the Midwest, our mountain removal project was completed about 10,000 years ago. So I understand we can be different. Things could be different in places where they still literally have mountains and the curves that are associated with that. But here in the upper Midwest anyway, we don't have dead man's curve. And so therefore the challenge is, how do you find curves to make investments in? So the average county here in Minnesota has around 200 curves, but they're not evenly distributed geographically. The southern part of our state has fewer curves. The northern part of the state has a more challenging terrain and has more curves. There's several counties in the northern part of our state that have 1,000 curves, and Vic has over 3,000 curves in St. Louis County. So again, the question, similar to what it was with rural segments, how do you prioritize? We came to the same conclusion that severe road departure crashes and curves are widely scattered, but they're not randomly scattered, and concluded that crash history by itself was not going to be an effective indicator of which curves were a priority. We also found that similar to our rural road segments, that there were roadway features that were common to the places that had severe crashes. And so some of these features included curve radius. We found that 60% of severe crashes occurred in curves that had radii between 500 feet and 1,200 feet. The presence of an intersection in the curve increased the risk. And then something I call a visual trap. It's where there's likely a gravel township road on the tangent extended. Those kinds of things increase the risk at any given curve. We also found that volume was a predictor, but in Minnesota, it was volumes between 200 and 1,000 vehicles a day. And so this is much lower volumes than is the standard in the manual on uniform traffic control devices that requires chevron installation. So what we found was curves with 3 or more of these risk factors were a priority that accounted for about 16% of the system. And those curves had crash densities that was about 40% higher than the average. And so again, you ask why chevrons. Vic has made the comment, we needed to be able to find things that we could afford to deploy at lots of places. You couldn't just pick a curve or 10 curves or even 20 curves. You had to be able to do a wide deployment across as many curves as possible, the priority curves. And with chevrons, you can do that for about $5,000 a curve, whereas reconstructing a curve like the one that's in your photo is probably anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000. And that also includes then having to purchase right of way. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Again, just the image at night, clearly an improvement in helping drivers understand what they're negotiating, what the geometry of the roadway looks like. The next slide, please. So what we've seen, chevrons have now been installed by the counties at over 4,000 high priority curves. And MnDOT has done similar installation at over 700 of their priority curves. Now the piece of trivia that I'm betting you don't know. The first chevrons in Minnesota were installed as an experiment since they weren't yet in the manual on uniform traffic control devices and by permit along a segment of US Highway 10 in the southeastern part of the metropolitan area. The segment of Highway 10 sits up on the bluff above the Mississippi River between Hastings, Minnesota and Prescott, Wisconsin. Again, more background. Chevrons were invented by the 3M Corporation in the late 1970s, and it was primarily invented as a tool to help market a new product of theirs called high-intensity sheeting material. And I happen to know this because I worked for the highway department at the time and was part of the staff that was tasked with reviewing 3M's permit to install these signs. And it turns out that this particular segment of Highway 10 just happened to be the route that 3M executives took to take guests who they showed the material at their test lab up in Cottage Grove, Minnesota, to their favorite restaurant over in Prescott, Wisconsin. So it not only might be I know this is the first use of chevrons in Minnesota. It occurred to me, since 3M is headquartered in Minnesota, it might be the first use of chevrons anywhere in the country. All right, trivia aside, they've turned out to be highly effective and 25% reduction nighttime non-intersection related crashes. So clearly we're on the right track with suggesting to the counties that there's a priority for their curves and that installation of these chevrons is a better than. Vic will now share his experiences in St. Louis County.
All right, thanks, Howard. One of the things I'm really interested in at St. Louis County, and we've had some efforts towards that here in Minnesota, is sign reduction and making sure that, we're deploying signs that are proven effective or, somewhat effective, right? And making sure that we reduce our sign clutter and sign density along our systems. But the one sign that I will always say, put out there as many as you can. I want high densities of these signs, our curve warning signs. They're the most effective tool we have for our curves to reduce those roadway departure events. We've deployed chevrons I've had projects where I think the number is upwards of 150 curves that we've treated in the last several years. We're looking at these curves that are in that 500 to 1400 foot radius. That's typically your 30 to 45 mile per hour curves typically. And that's where most of our serious roadway departure crashes are occurring. Next slide. And why we're treating curves, and this is why I put such a heavy emphasis on this. It's a low-cost strategy and it's very effective. But this is the crash tree here in St. Louis County. If you trace the red boxes down to the bottom, or the output of the type of crash that you're looking at, I place the red boxes based on the number of serious crashes by location, type, those sorts of things, and just basically follow the yellow brick road, and it leads you to curves. So in other words, the greatest problem we have in St. Louis County, the greatest problem we have in Minnesota, the greatest problem we have in the United States, and I've been to several federal highway peer exchanges on this topic, is roadway departure, roadway departure, roadway departure, and that's why we're talking about this today. Next slide. All right, I love this slide. I've used it many times. There are 6 safety strategies in this picture. This is why I like this picture so much. This is on a county road here in St. Louis County, and I took this picture many years ago. But the 6 safety strategies in this picture, by the trained eye, I suppose. First, the chevron signs. Second, shoulder rumble strips. Third, we have a paved shoulder. Fourth, we have a 6-inch wide edge line. Fifth, you notice that intersection off in the distance there. That intersection decades ago used to be, we'll call it a tangent extension off from the tangents of the main highway when they realigned the highway and put it in the curve. But several years ago, the county, and you can see because there's a bunch of trees there, but this is many years ago, the county removed those tangent extensions and made it a single T curve. So that's the fifth safety strategy. And the sixth one is the hardest to spot here. Is there's a high friction surface treatment we're going to talk about in a second that was deployed in this curve as well. But 6 safety strategies in one curve. These are the things that we're talking about for our webinar today. Next slide. This is an example of a resource that we put together for our sign crews, so that not only are we identifying curves through our safety plan and other data type searches, but also when our county sign crews are out installing new signs, it's a continuous process to make sure that we maintain those minimum retroreflectivities. This was a guide chart that we put together for our sign crews so that they could easily identify when to install a curve warning sign in advance and when to install chevron signs, and also the speed advisory placard that would go with that. We share it as an example of what you could do. Certainly, you can download the presentation. You can grab this and consider that for your agency too. Next slide. All right, and then finally on this topic, I wanted to showcase a couple resources that Federal Highway has put together. They produced a couple videos and they're on YouTube in terms of how to stake out and install curve warning signs in a curve. Some helpful tools that you can use, pass off to your sign crews. They can watch these videos and it helps them place the chevron signs appropriately. The one thing I will mention on this is I would encourage you, and this might differ from the MUTCD, which is fine, but that first chevron sign when you're approaching a curve, you should think about having that first chevron sign in the tangent extension of the tangent approach to that curve, so that chevron sign is front and center in that driver's field of view. All right, next slide.
Hey,
Polling
thanks,
question.
Vic. We'll head back to our polling questions as we transition to a new topic, which is high friction surface treatments. So again, please go ahead, pull up Mentimeter and rate your level of knowledge on a scale of 1 to 5. Starting right in the middle, just like the rest of ours, maybe we're slightly less familiar with high friction surface treatments overall. Give it 5 more seconds here. All right. So for those that are familiar, what are those barriers that are preventing you from implementing high friction surface treatments? Again, cost is coming up today. This is a recurring theme. Ongoing maintenance, our cost of materials, the funding. Okay. New, maybe where to install some of those things. Great. Well, Howard will get us started again here with our high friction surface treatments. Howard, go ahead.
Thanks, Maddie. I'll go quickly through here and get back to Vic, who has a lot of experience dealing with this in St. Louis County. It's just to say friction and curves, especially on wet weather, is an issue. Vic will go over the physics, the formulas, but the amount of super elevation, the radius of the curve, and the amount of friction that's available are what determines what kind of a speed you can take through a curve. And so it's hard to change the radius. We're limited to the amount of super elevation we can use. So adjusting the friction factor, enhancing that is one reasonably cost-effective way of improving operations through the curves. Next slide, please. And so again, just the numbers are incredibly supportive of the notion that improving friction in these curves results in a reduction of crashes, particularly during wet weather. So with that, Vic, I'll pass it on to you, and please share your experiences in St. Louis.
Thanks, Howard. Our first high friction surface treatment project we implemented was in 2020. But let's first talk about the physics. So picture yourself playing with your kids, or maybe when you were a kid, swinging a ball on a rope or a tether, and that that rope that was connected to the ball generated the centripetal force to keep that ball from proceeding in a straight line where it would have gone if it hadn't been for the rope. The analogy for the curves is that your tires are the rope, okay? So the tires generate the centripetal force to keep your vehicle in the curve instead of your vehicle cascading off the outside of the curve on a tangent alignment. So here's the minimum radius design equation. Okay, so you find this in the AASHTO Green Book. So determining the minimum radius of a curve based on your design speed. But I solved it for velocity, okay? And what you're seeing is there's three variables, and Howard already mentioned these: the radius, the super elevation, and the friction. So in order to adjust your radius and super elevation variables, you have to reconstruct the curve, okay? Which sometimes when you have the opportunity, you should be doing that, okay? Always take the opportunities when you can. But most of your curves are probably going to be the way they are for many years to come, decades to come, which means you still have an opportunity to affect this equation, and it's through your friction. And that's where high friction surface treatments really start to shine, is that we can improve the ability for those vehicles to stay in their lane by improving the friction. So that's the next picture. Next slide. Okay, so this is a quick map of the high friction surface treatments that we've deployed in the county thus far. We actually have 6 curves that we're treating this year. The one thing I will mention in terms of how we selected these curves, these are the highest of the high risk curves in our county road safety plan. So we have a ranking of different, we'll call them risk stars, that we assign to different curves. And the ones that are at the very top of the list with the most risk factors that are present, those are the curves that we're focusing on in terms of treating with an HFST. Next slide. Okay, just a couple quick pictures for just showcasing how this process works. A lot of our roads have chip seals on them, and if your road has a chip seal, I highly advise that you would have to micro mill or remove that chip seal prior to deploying or applying the HFST. There's a very high risk of delamination when you apply an HFST on top of a chip seal, which is why we got it back down to the original pavement section. Next slide. This is a picture of the device that was actually applying the HFST. This is an automated type process. So you have 2 process types or installation methods. You could have a automated process, which is a truck that's self-contained, has all the epoxy and aggregate materials on the truck itself, and deploys it in a very uniform fashion. The other methodology would be a manual process where you have somebody spraying the aggregates and somebody squeegeeing the epoxy on the pavement surface, okay? We've done both. They seem to have good results on the manual side. I was a little concerned on the consistency, but it seemed to be pretty good consistency on the manual approach. So we've had good experience with both of them. But, you know, the surefire way, of course, is the automated process that you see in this picture. Next slide. After the installation of the HFST, I highly recommend to groove in your wet reflective markings, and that's what you're seeing in this slide. And then the next slide should be a picture. Yep. Okay. This is a picture of one of our HFSTs that we installed. The light color portion of the road, that is the HFST. It's a calcined bauxite aggregate. It's a manufactured aggregate. And the reason we use calcined bauxite is the hardness is greater than any natural aggregate source that exists. And you get longevity, excuse me, in the application that we're expecting about 10 years of service life for our HFSTs. You can see a little web link there. Minnesota Local Road Research Board, LRB, did a showcase of a St. Louis County HFST application. You can watch the video, and I'm in that video, I suppose. All right, next slide. Our experience has broke it down there by the different components of the process, but at the bottom of the table, for budgeting purposes, we estimate about $100,000 to $125,000 per curve. That is based on a typical 45-mile-per-hour curve at about 1,100 to 1,500 feet in length, and we're just applying the HFST within the driving lane. So we don't apply it across the center line joint. We don't go outside the white edge line. We just keep it about 11 feet wide. So you have 2 applications of the HFST through the curve just to minimize the cost of the project. So the next slide, this whole cost issue, and that was, I'm glad that I saw those responses in that poll, very informative. That cost is the issue. Well, that's a research project, if you don't mind me plugging, from the Minnesota Local Road Research Board. You can find the report here and the summary of the project on that web blog here. It is a project where St. Louis County was assisting with this research, where we're using a taconite material. It's a natural aggregate from the Iron Range here in Minnesota, but a taconite is the overburden rock, okay, with some iron impregnated into it. But we were using that as a substitute aggregate. You can find the results on that site, but because it's a natural aggregate here in Minnesota, whereas a lot of the calcined bauxite comes from overseas, we do believe that there could be a cost advantage from this. Secondly, the performance of it was very similar. And of course, I have to be careful with the details, but it was deployed on a test section, on a tangent section of roadway, not on a curve. We're looking at potentially a phase 2 research to deploy these on a curve, this taconite-based potential HFST. But there's still more research to be done, but we're trying to look at some ideas to reduce the cost of HFST here in Minnesota to get more treatments across the system. Next slide. All right, I think this is Howard.
Vic, thanks. And we've talked about the first step that ASHTO suggests, keep vehicles in the lane, the rumbles, the enhanced pavement markings, the ground and wet reflective, those kinds of things. Now we're going to talk about things that, okay, if vehicles do leave the road, what are some of the improvements that would be possible? So we're going to talk about something called a safety edge, and then doing slope improvements. So with that, Maddie, I think you have a polling question.
Sure do. Thanks, Howard. Okay, safety edge is our first countermeasure that we'll talk about. So again, go ahead and rate your level of knowledge here. And it looks like folks are fairly familiar with our safety edge. We'll give it a couple more seconds. Okay. And we'll move on again to talking about some of those barriers that are preventing you from currently implementing those safety edges. Okay. A couple of no barriers, maybe just knowledge, needing some more. Of course, cost comes into play. Maintenance availability. Okay. Challenging constructability. Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll move on, and Howard, we'll have you take it away.
Thanks, Maddie. When a vehicle runs off the road to the right, the height of the vertical drop from the pavement surface to the gravel shoulder is a key predictor as to what is likely to happen next. Will the vehicle make a smooth transition back onto the pavement, or does it basically shoot across the travel lane and into an opposing lane? At drop-offs less than an inch, the vehicle will likely make the smooth transition back onto the pavement. But as the drop-offs get greater than an inch, the smooth recovery is less likely. And that's because as the drop-off increases, as the driver tries to maneuver their vehicle back into their lane, they turn the wheel to the left, and if nothing happens, they turn it a little more to the left, and they turn a little more. And what's happening at these greater drop-offs, it's the inner sidewall of the tire that's scrubbing against the vertical edge of the pavement, and there's not enough friction to lift that vehicle up. And so what happens again is driver keeps turning the wheel farther to the left, farther to the left, farther to the left. And at some point, they've turned the wheel enough such that a tread of the tire catches, and that then can generate enough lift to get the vehicle back up onto the pavement. But at that point, they're pointed across the road, and if they're doing 60 miles an hour, that's 90 feet per second. and the driver's half-second reaction time is 40 seconds, 40 seconds later. Anyway, they're into the other lane, they're off the road to the other side. So that's the problem with the shoulder drop-off. With the safety edge like this, you don't get any scrubbing. There's no tire scrubbing. It facilitates the smooth transition for the vehicles to get back onto the pavement. Next slide, please. So again, the effectiveness. This is a relatively low-cost strategy, and an effectiveness of a reduction of almost 25% of the road departure crashes. Maddie, I think you have another polling question now.
I do. Thanks, Howard. Okay, so this was a quick one here. Hope that Mentimeter is pulled up and ready for you all, but we'll move on to our side slope improvements. So again, thinking through that, looks like we're starting off strong with a lot of familiarity with our side slope improvements. Great to see. We'll give it about 5 more seconds for folks to roll in. But I believe that this one is potentially the most familiar. Okay, let's talk through barriers. What are those barriers preventing you from implementing side slope improvements? Cost strikes again. Right of way, absolutely. Okay, we've got a common theme here. Our right of way and our cost are certainly factors that are playing into that decision making on whether or not we can implement. So we'll go ahead and talk through some more side slope improvements. Howard, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Maddie. Our roadside design guides now say that we want the side slopes to be 6-to-1 or flatter. If the slopes are steeper than that, particularly as you get to the range of 3-to-1 or 4-to-1, vehicles are going to go down to the bottom of that. If they try turning up something that's that steep, they're going to roll over. And so at 3-to-1 and 4-to-1 side slopes, vehicles are going down into the ditch or they're rolling over. And so the notion again is to provide this 6-to-1 or flatter kind of side slope. Next slide, please, Manny. And clearly by doing so, there's a reduction in the level of injury and the number of severe crashes associated with rollovers. And I get it, though, in order to go from 3-to-1 or 4-to-1, that's basically reconstruction here in Minnesota. And reconstruction, even on rural roadways, is over $1 million a mile. And there's not enough money in the whole world associated with safety that can afford to be implementing widely strategies that cost $1 million a mile to implement. And so that's clearly a challenge. Next slide, please, Maddie. All right, so we're going to be talking about enhancing clear zones. And again, there's some very obvious things you can do to make the clear zones less dangerous. And then there's also one thing that maybe you haven't thought of that we'll talk about, is that's how managing driveways and access on rural roadways is part of an enhancement to a clear zone. Just again, background, I found that the first mention of the notion of a clear zone was AASHTO's 1967 Highway Design and Operational Practices Related to Highway Safety. Think about that, 1967. It suggests to me that prior to the late 60s, highway designers really weren't thinking of what's off the edge of the road. That just wasn't something that was a common thing to think about. So late 60s, clear zones and the notion of a forgiving roadside were mentioned again in the update that was in AASHTO's 74. I call it the yellow book because these documents had a yellow cover. And it mentioned 1974 was the first time when it was suggested that a clear width of 30 feet permits about 80% of the vehicles leaving the road to recover. There was a footnote that said, oh, by the way, that was determined based on operations along a vehicle encroachments on a private road. And if you looked into it far enough, it turned out to be the General Motors test track. So no opposing traffic, no ditches. It was the private road, and it was 30 feet. Then in 1977, there was another update. The book was still yellow, the cover, but it was called Guide to Locating, Selecting, and Designing Traffic Barriers. And it was in that 77 document that it was acknowledged clear zones weren't a constant value along a road system. It was a function of what was the volume of the road, what was the speed of the road, what did the side slopes look like, and there was also then a separate chart for saying the outside of horizontal curves were particularly at risk, and it increased the size of the clear zone along the outside of those curves. So again, moving forward, we're going to discuss some ideas of clear zone maintenance, talk about driveways, and now Maddie has another polling question for you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Howard. So getting started with our general clear zone maintenance strategies, how familiar are you? Folks are leaning toward being pretty familiar, perhaps very, but quite familiar, some would say. We'll give it 5 more seconds for folks to continue answering. And then we'll move on to talking about those barriers from implementing general clear zone maintenance strategies. Okay. Some right-of-way, some staffing, cost. Again, more staffing, maybe, right-of-way for those property owners, and the maintenance. Okay. Go ahead and keep continuing to put in your answers. We will go back to Howard to talk through this some more.
Well, I'll go quickly through this because there's not an awful lot to share other than when vehicles run off the road here in Minnesota, the 3 most common things that vehicles hit are trees, signposts, and mailboxes. And here in Minnesota, we've made the signposts and even our mailboxes on rural roads breakaway. But trees account for the most common thing that vehicles run into when they run off the road. 30% of our road departure crashes, the obstacles that vehicles engage with is a tree. And yeah, I know it's hard to cut trees down. It sometimes still surprises me that there's a group of folks out there who place trees above people's lives. They don't seem to get that. But tree maintenance is clearing the right of way of trees is a really important thing. Next slide, please, Maddie. Again, just showing roadside slopes that are clear and recoverable. Let's go on to the next slide, please. And then the notion is that, yeah, there is a reduction that you can expect in crashes if there's nothing there for vehicles to hit, that people aren't going to be injured generally by running off into these clear roadside areas. Vic, why don't you share with us some things that you've observed in St. Louis County?
So the 2 pictures I want to share with you is the atypical county highway and the typical county highway. So both pictures are here on our St. Louis County road system. And this is your atypical county highway where we wish we could have a cross section like this to work with to address these roadway departure type crashes. You can see there's a centerline sinusoidal rumble strip in this picture, but wide lanes, wide paved shoulders, wide clear zones, flatter end slopes. We have shoulder rumble strips out here, and we have places to work within, right, to add these strategies, many of those strategies within the cross section. But the typical county highway segment on the next slide looks something like this. And these cross sections were constructed well over 100 years ago. We're still living with the same cross sections today, likely not going to be reconstructed even in my lifetime. narrower lanes, narrower shoulders, in slopes that are V-ditch style shape, in the range of 1 to 5 to 1, even up to 3 to 1, clear zones that are minimal. Well, so in terms of what we're doing, next slide is, we really can't address the inslope area or the roadside geometry. And so what we're taking is a systematic approach by doing a tree removal process. So we have this program that we've implemented several years ago where we use our county maintenance forces to each winter to work on clearing trees from our roadside. And yeah, the V-ditches still remain, the inslopes, their substandards still remain, but the best thing that we can do, and what I'm most concerned about, is removing the trees out of the roadside area so that when a vehicle does run off the road, and they're going to have some significant vehicle damage from the roadside shape geometry, but at least there won't be a tree, hopefully, that'll be within that clear zone area. So I would encourage you to think about, from a roadside standpoint, if you can't modify your roadside geometry, just focus on removing those trees, because those trees are the #1 fixed object on the roadside that's going to result in serious injury type or fatal crashes. Next slide. And just a quick picture of one example of a county road here in St. Louis County that we had completed some roadside clearing. You can see the wider clear zone area out there. One other incidental benefit is it opens up those ditches to sunlight and provides some better drainage and evaporation of water in your roadside ditches. Next. All right, we have a polling question.
Moving on to our last set of polling questions like this, and this one is on our access management and driveway consolidation strategies. I'll ask you to keep your Mentimeters open. We're not done with it after this, but we will be done with this set of questions. So folks are, again, fairly familiar with access management and driveway consolidation strategies. Let's talk and think through what some of these barriers are for implementing them. Okay, how are we working with our landowners? The public resistance. Yeah, business impacts. Okay, really focused on our communities, our landowners, the public, right-of-way zoning control, just that general resistance, and your elected officials. Absolutely. Go ahead and keep filling that out while Howard gives us an overview on access management. Go ahead, Howard.
Thanks, Maddie. A set of roadside obstacles that shown here in the photos that is easy to overlook are driveway and field entrances. And the side slopes, if they're over steeper than 1 and 6, what ends up happening is that any vehicle that gets into the ditch is going to encounter this slope. And again, it's slope steeper than 1 and 6. The bumper of the vehicle is going to bury in the slope before the wheel starts coming up. And if that happens, it's likely that the vehicle is end over end. And that's a bad day for the folks inside that vehicle. Next slide, please, Maddie. What we've show here, the graph on the right is for state highways. The graph on the left, the graph on the right is county roads, the left is state highways. But what these both show is that access densities over 8 accesses per mile are associated with higher crash densities, higher crash rates. And so this is the work on the research on the state highway system was done back in the late 90s. The work on the county road system was done in the early 2000s. And I guess I wasn't surprised to see that there was the same set of conclusions that the more access you have, the more likely you are to have higher crash densities, higher crash rates. But what it's getting at here again is that in rural Minnesota, you typically have 2 farms in a section of land. So there's 4 driveways, 2 on both sides. You throw in a couple of more township roads, you're now up to 8 accesses in a mile, which is the threshold of having an at-risk segment. And then if there's field entrances in addition to the driveways to the farms, you're well over 8 accesses per mile, which again puts the road segment in this risk category for access. I know one of the county engineers in the southern part of the state chose to take on a project where they went out to the farmers and basically said, let's make a deal. And the deal was, your field entrances look like they're too small for the equipment that you now have. The deal is, if you give up your old field entrances, for every 2 you give up, I'll give you 1 back that has the 6-to-1 slopes and is wide enough to accommodate your new equipment. Next slide, please, Manny. And the idea being that being able to address this issue of too many rural accesses on the rural roads by working with the farmers, by working with folks to say, can you consolidate driveways? Can I give you back driveways that have 6-to-1 slopes instead of the steeper slopes? There's an opportunity to, again, reduce the number of obstacles that are out there for vehicles to run into. All right, Maddie, one more, please. Next slide. So again, the notion, if you've done everything you can to keep vehicles in their lane, if you've tried to deal with the recoverable slopes, if you're doing what you can do to remove obstacles from the clear zones, then the last thing to talk about is shielding obstacles. The next slide, please. In Minnesota, we use both cable barrier and steel plate beam guardrail. Cable barrier is cheaper. It tends to minimize issues associated with snow drifting. However, the cable barrier has a dynamic deflection of 8 or 10 feet, and you need to affirmatively determine that you have that kind of room behind the cable to work with. You should also know that barrier is not, neither of these barriers is designed to be put up behind curb, that a vehicle impacting curb before impacting the barrier, the center of mass of that vehicle will move, and barrier is designed to have center of mass of a vehicle at a specific spot. And so these aren't solutions that really ought to go behind any kind of curb and gutter. It's also important to note that all of the crash testing of this barrier is done at a relatively shallow angle, I think something on the order of 30 degrees. So no barrier is meant to be hit at steep angles, 70, 80, 90 degrees. That's just not how it would work. And then just one final thought to share, if you're considering the use of barriers, before installing a barrier, to shield a particular obstacle at a particular location, you should conduct a census of your system to see how many other locations you have that are similar. And if you don't choose to protect those also, you better have a reason, because shielding one location but not another similar location or 100 other similar locations, I think, is a real invitation to future claims of negligence. With that, I'll turn it back to Derek and Vic, and you're going to wrap us up. So thank you.
All right, Derek, take it away.
All right, thank you. We wanted to end with one final testimony from the public. This one comes from Sarah in International Falls. We were coming back from Rapid City, South Dakota yesterday and just crossed over into Minnesota. We were approaching the interchange at Laverne, which is exit 12 on Highway 90. My 15-year-old son is working on getting some driving experience, so I had him take the wheel to get some practice on the interstate. We ended up in a tough spot, and got hit on the driver's side rear quarter during a lane change. It spun us, similar to a pit maneuver, and we ended up in the guardrail. The guardrail saved my son's life. All 5 of us exited the vehicle without a scratch. Our airbags deployed, adding extra protection. But I am convinced at the speed we were traveling, if there would not have been a guardrail, our car would have rolled without question. This is a thank you to MnDOT and your safety program. Your good work saved my family, and we are not the only ones. With that, I will turn it back over to Vic. Vic.
All right. We'll wrap it up here. And again, quick reminder, priority 1, keeping vehicles in the lane. Priority 2, making sure that your immediate shoulder area is recoverable, and also providing some warning if possible to redirect that vehicle in the lane. And then priority 3, if all those first 2 aspects fail, is making sure that your clear zone is free of hazards, particularly trees. All right, next slide. So this call to action. So I've got a couple thoughts here of like, how do we put this into action? We've had a lot of good information here today, but with you and your local agency or your agency and your part of the world, what should you be doing? The first thing I would say is focus on your community, focus on your system. The example I would have is I'm not particularly fond of heights personally. And so when I'm working on a roof or something, what I always have to keep reminding myself is focus on my task at hand, which is putting the shingles on or doing something. Don't look around at the big picture. Focus on what I'm doing at the moment. Makes it a lot easier for me to not feel like I'm going to fall off the roof. The same thing for highway safety. It's easy to look at the statewide numbers, the countywide numbers, or whatever the case is, and those can be very discouraging, but focus on making it 0 on your community, your city, your county, your township. It'll help a lot. Number 2, be intentional about your safety program. Make it a priority. Think about a mission statement, a board proclamation, incorporating safety into your CIP projects, identifying a champion within your agency. It doesn't have to be an engineer, it doesn't have to be a planner, but somebody who's going to be that facilitator, that champion to keep moving these projects and these programs forward. Another idea is working with your neighboring agencies. So if you're in a neck of a state or wherever that maybe you don't have the resources, but a county or something next to you does have the resources, work together as a partnership in a region, and even think about doing bundling of projects that they can help leverage their resources and expertise onto your system. And lastly, I would say your focus ought to be on roadway departure and intersections, and keep that focus in terms of we're looking for the strategies we talked today. Let's keep implementing those strategies as often as we possibly can. And then secondly, even thinking about your intersections. So with that, I think we're going to turn it over to the final couple slides. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Vic. And a couple final polling questions here. So we want you to get thinking about what actions can you commit to after listening to this webinar and just attending in general. So we've got a couple here listed. Of course, this list is not exhaustive. And this idea was generated actually from Vic when we were in person in our workshops. At the end of those workshops, we would ask folks to pick up a commitment statement on their way out. So this is our virtual version of that. We'd just like to know maybe what you can commit to. And it looks like that top response is incorporating one of the road lane departure safety strategies that we discussed today, which is fantastic. Others may have chosen to be a safety champion at my agency and work toward reaching 0 deaths in my jurisdiction. And then we've got a few sprinkled throughout. So appreciate that, everyone. And thank you again, everyone, for attending. Feel free to reach out to me if you've got any questions, to Germa, to Derek, to anyone on the team that presented today. Thanks, everyone, and stay safe on the roads. Take care.